Most people believe that when a man is truly in love, he becomes emotional. But that is only half the truth. The deeper truth is this: when a man meets the one woman his soul recognizes, he doesn't just express more emotion, he expresses more discipline. He sharpens his focus, he quiets the noise, and for the first time, he begins to build not a life of pleasure, but a life of purpose. Pause for a moment. What if the way you're trying to find out whether a man truly loves you? By analyzing his messages, his effort, his attention, is distracting you from seeing the energetic shifts that only the one can trigger in him. You don't need to chase the signs, because when a man truly sees you as his woman, he changes, not for you, but because of you. Quietly, deeply, permanently. Let's now explore the 9 uncommon things a man only does for the one. Things that only the most awakened women can recognize. Welcome to Self-Mastery, your space for real wisdom and inner growth. Subscribe and remember name of our YouTube channel, Self-Mastery, because others may copy the voice, but the truth lives here. Let us begin. When a man truly sees a woman as the one, something remarkable begins to happen, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly. Beneath the surface of his usual behavior, he doesn't just become more affectionate or attentive in the ways society often highlights. Instead, his inner world begins to shift. His choices become more centered. His distractions lose their power, and his desire for novelty fades, not because he is bored, but because he has found something profoundly grounding. Most people observe a man's actions in relationships through a narrow lens. They ask, is he calling enough? S, does he spend money on her? S5, is he making future plans? But what is often missed are the subtle changes in his inner frequency. There's a difference between a man who is pursuing you and a man who has arrived into presence with you. And that difference is felt, not heard. When a man meets a woman who reflects peace back to him, not excitement, not intensity, but as presence is, he feels, perhaps for the first time in his life, that he doesn't have to run anymore. This stillness is not passive, it is powerful. It quiets his fears, not by solving them, but by making them irrelevant in her presence. A man who has been running from his own restlessness will often chase intensity in relationships. He will mistake chaos for passion. He will confuse being needed with being loved. But when he meets the one woman who is grounded in herself, who does not move with the wind of his moods, who brings quiet instead of questions, he starts to feel a new kind of desire. Not a desire of the body, but a desire of the spirit, to settle, not because he must, but because he wants to. A young man once said, "When I met her, I didn't feel the butterflies I expected. I felt peace. I thought something was wrong with me at first, but weeks passed and I noticed I was no longer drawn to my usual patterns. I didn't crave temporary things. I started organizing my life. I began waking up earlier. I wasn't even trying to impress her anymore. I just felt more myself around her than I ever did alone." This man had unknowingly described something ancient. In Eastern philosophy, this experience is referred to as anchoring energy. The presence of a still, self-aware person anchors the chaos of another, not by force, but by vibration. His devotion wasn't an act of effort. It was a emergency from within, sparked by the frequency of peace she carried. In neuroscience, this phenomenon also has language. It is observed through co-regulation. When two people come together, their nervous systems speak before their words do. A woman whose nervous system is calm, who does not need constant reassurance or emotional drama to feel loved, becomes a safe environment for a man to let go of his hypervigilance. This doesn't mean she never has emotions. It means she doesn't weaponize them. This is when devotion starts to arise, not from pressure, but from peace. In our modern world, many women are told to be more attractive by enhancing their appearance, building financial independence, or keeping a man on his toes. But the truth is, none of these strategies reach the core of masculine transformation. The only energy a man cannot pretend with is stillness. Stillness shows him who he truly is. It removes the performance mask, and if he feels loved in the absence of performance, he starts to root himself in that love. This is why a man may shower many women with attention, but only serve one woman with his full presence, because she didn't ignite his ego, she relaxed it. And in that relaxation, he began to notice something deeper. He wasn't running toward love anymore. He was already there. In every man, there is a longing not just for success, but for stillness. He may not know it consciously. He may chase validation, adventure, or stimulation, but underneath all of that is a tiredness, a fatigue from wearing armor all the time. When he meets the woman who does not fight him or fix him, but meets him in presence, that armor begins to melt, and the man that emerges from that melting is often the one she never knew existed. He becomes clear-eyed. He begins to speak without defense. He listens differently. He no longer seeks freedom from her. He feels free with her. This is not chemistry. This is clarity. And it's rare, but it goes even deeper. Once a man has experienced this stillness in connection, another part of him begins to awaken. The part he rarely shows. The part that was taught from a young age to hide emotion behind stoicism, to hide softness behind sarcasm. And suddenly, he doesn't want to hide anymore. But he doesn't announce it either. He simply starts revealing at his inner world. Quietly, carefully, but only with her. In psychological terms, this process is known as emotional attunement. When a man feels emotionally safe, he moves from reactive behavior into reflective presency. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for planning, emotional regulation, and empathy, becomes more active. He is no longer governed by the limbic system, the fight or flight center. He begins to regulate himself through the relationship, and in doing so, he becomes more open, more thoughtful, and more deeply connected to his own emotions. But this openness is not offered to everyone. A man may have many friends, companions, even lovers, and yet keep this deeper dimension of himself sealed away. Why? Because the conditions must be just right. The woman must be soft enough to receive, but strong enough not to collapse into his emotions. She must hold a sacred neutrality, not judging what he shares, not needing to fix it, but allowing him to process at his own pace. A man once shared the story of a time he opened up about a childhood wound. It wasn't planned. It came suddenly, during a quiet moment when she was simply listening. No reaction, no interruption, just presence. He said, "I told her something I hadn't told anyone in 20 years. And she didn't flinch. She didn't cry for me. She didn't ask 100 questions. She just said, 'Thank you for trusting me.' And in that moment, I knew this woman could hold my soul. What he was describing is the power of energetic safety. Only 1% of women create this naturally, not because they are special, but because they have done the work of becoming whole within themselves. They don't need a man to give them identity. They invite a man to share his truth without fear. That difference changes everything. From a neurological perspective, this level of trust activates the brain's oxytocin release, the bonding hormone. Unlike dopamine, which is linked to excitement and reward, oxytocin fosters a long-term connection and emotional security. When a man feels this level of safety, he becomes emotionally loyal, not just relationally loyal. His thoughts begin to include her automatically. His future visions begin to form around her presence, not because she asked, but because it feels natural. In ancient texts, this type of union was not romanticized. It was revered. It was seen as a joining of energies that not only healed wounds, but evolved consciousness. In modern terms, we might say it like this: when a man finds the one, she doesn't become his whole world, but she becomes the space where he feels safe enough to finally be whole. So how do you recognize this side of a man? You won't see it in his Instagram stories or hear it in his romantic words. You'll see it in how he begins to grow quieter in your presence. Not withdrawn, but more aware. He'll pause before speaking. He'll start asking deeper questions. His protective instincts will rise, not out of jealousy, but out of reverence. And above all, he will begin to invite you into his private world, piece by piece, without the need for performance. This is not fast. This is not loud. This is not viral. This is sacred. It's a process that requires a woman to first see without seeking, to listen without interpreting, to receive without trying to control. Only then does the man feel the permission to reveal what he never shows the world: his depth, his doubts, his tenderness, his longing to lead. Not from ego, but from love. And once that begins, everything changes. Not because the man becomes someone new, but because he finally becomes who he was always meant to be. True masculine love is not loud. It does not need to announce itself. It does not come decorated in constant compliments or dramatized gestures. It does not beg for attention, nor does it perform for approval. Instead, it appears quietly, almost invisibly, through one of the rarest expressions a man can offer in a relationship: vulnerability, without fear of losing respect. To understand the depth of this, one must first realize what men are taught from a young age. In most environments, boys grow up being praised for power, logic, stoicism, and control. If they cry, they are told to toughen up. If they express fear, they are mocked or dismissed. So they learn to internalize a version of strength that is rigid, unbending, and silent. But deep within every man is a place untouched by these teachings. A place where he wants to be seen not as a protector or provider alone, but simply as a person with softness, uncertainty, and emotion. Most men carry this hidden self for years, often decades, and many never fully express it. Not because they don't want to, but because they don't feel safe enough. They fear that the moment they let their guard down, they will be seen as weak, or worse, unworthy. This fear is not irrational. In many relationships, when a man opens up, the woman, unintentionally, responds with emotional panic, judgment, or urgency to fix him. That reaction teaches him to retreat, to protect his inner world again with silence or humor. But with the right woman, something different happens. He begins to sense that he can let go, just a little, that he can lay down his armor and still be respected. He watches her closely, not with suspicion, but with hope. He offers a fragment of his truth, perhaps a story from the past, perhaps a quiet confession of something he's unsure about. He doesn't explain it fully. He just lets it exist, and then he watches. Not her words, but her energy. If she listens without trying to manage his pain, if she holds his truth without reducing him to it, if she does not shrink from his vulnerability or shame him for it, then he feels something rare, safety with dignity. This is the beginning of real masculine love. Not the love that clings or controls or demands, but the kind of love that leads, not by force, but by presence. A man who has tasted this level of safety begins to rise in a new way. His leadership becomes more rooted. His actions become more intentional. And his emotional world, once hidden beneath layers of performance, becomes a source of connection instead of conflict. In the ancient warrior traditions, the strongest men were not the ones who fought the most battles. They were the ones who could return home, and hold space for their families with grace and presence. They knew how to switch from sword to stillness. That is the mark of true masculine maturity. Not just being powerful in the world, but being peaceful in the presence of those he loves. One man once shared a story from his early marriage. He said, "My wife used to ask me what I was feeling, and I genuinely didn't know. I wasn't hiding anything. I had just learned never to go there. But one day I saw her sitting in silence, just breathing, not needing me to answer anything. And in that moment, I felt something shift. I started crying without knowing why. She didn't ask me what it was. She just held my hand. That was the day I realized I could be a man and still feel." This kind of shift does not happen through conversation. It happens through presence. Women who want to invite this depth from a man must understand you cannot demand vulnerability from him. You must embody the calmness that shows him it is safe to emerge. You cannot force his openness, but you can inspire it by becoming a sanctuary for his unspoken truths. When he sees that your respect for him grows deeper, when he reveals his heart, he will not hide it again. But when he sees your energy shift into panic or control, he will choose silence over risk. It takes a rare kind of woman to hold space for masculine vulnerability without turning it into a rescue mission. But those who do often discover a man far deeper than they ever imagined. They don't get a softer version of him. They get a complete version of him. And in that completeness, his love becomes stable, enduring, and deeply real. This kind of love is closely tied to the next expression most people miss: the emergence of a man's protective nature. Not as a mechanism of control, but as an organic result of emotional safety. When a man loves deeply, he begins to show up in ways that aren't always romantic, but are profoundly meaningful. His instinct to protect is not about domination. It's about preservation, not of ego, but of connection. There is a fundamental truth. A man cannot protect what he does not value, and he will not value what he does not feel energetically responsible for. When a woman creates a field of peace in a man's life, he begins to feel that she is not just someone to enjoy, but someone to guard. Not in a possessive way, but in a quiet, steady way that says, "Your well-being matters to me." This is not about physical safety alone. It is emotional, spiritual, and energetic. He begins to notice how others treat her. He becomes more aware of what she needs, even when she doesn't say it. He starts creating space for her voice, not out of obligation, but out of devotion. And perhaps most powerfully, he begins to lead with consideration, not just action. In relationships where this energy is present, there is often a subtle but unmistakable shift. The woman no longer feels like she has to fight to be heard or seen. She doesn't have to explain her needs. The man has tuned into her frequency. He begins to sense discomfort before it becomes conflict. He starts taking initiative, not because he was told to, but because he is emotionally invested in the shared atmosphere of peace. There's a story of a couple who had been together for years. The woman once said, "He never tells me every day that he loves me. But when I'm tired, he runs the bath. When I'm anxious, he takes the long route to talk with me in the car. And when we argue, he never storms out. He sits in silence until I'm ready. I don't need grand gestures. I need this quiet loyalty." And he gives it without asking. This kind of protective love is what makes a man feel whole. Not because he is controlling someone else's life, but because he is in harmony with it. It's not about territory. It's about care. And this care grows only in a space where both people feel emotionally safe, seen, and respected. In psychological terms, this is often the result of secure attachment. When a man moves from anxious or avoidant patterns into secure bonding, he doesn't lose his masculine edge. he refines it. He stops reacting from fear. He starts responding from strength, and the woman feels this shift in small, daily ways. It may show up as the way he starts protecting her time, encouraging her rest, reminding her of her value, not as flattery, but as anchoring. It may show up in his attentiveness to what she doesn't say, in his consistent presence during storms, or in his silent watching over her when she is vulnerable. This is the protector rising, not because he feels entitled to her, but because he feels entrusted with her. When a man is with a woman who amplifies peace in his life, he begins to feel nourished, not drained. And in this nourishment, he finds his greatest strength not in conquering the world, but in Aya's serving, the relationship with consistency, presence, and quiet purpose. His masculinity no longer seeks validation. It finds fulfillment in guarding what is sacred between them. This dynamic doesn't need rules or demands. It doesn't need ultimatums or manipulation. It only requires two people who are willing to meet each other where they are and rise together, not in competition, but in co-creation. When a woman brings clarity to a man's emotional chaos, he becomes not just more loving, but more responsible with that love. And responsibility in love is not heavy. It is freeing, because it gives a man the most meaningful role he could play, not just being present, but being as purposefully present, with his energy, his attentiveness, and his unwavering desire to see the one he loves thrive safely and fully. There comes a moment in a man's life when love no longer feels like a distraction, but a direction, a turning point where he no longer sees the relationship as something happening beside his path, but as something that defines and refines his path. This shift does not happen for every man. It is not triggered by beauty, charm, or even loyalty alone. It happens when he is deeply seen by a woman who awakens in him the desire not to chase love, but to rise toward it. This is when a man no longer seeks validation in external things, status, attention, conquest. He starts to look inward. He begins to examine his habits, his discipline, his priorities. He does not do this because she asked him to. He does not do it because she threatens to leave unless he changes. He does it because something in her presence reflects back to him a version of himself he had forgotten, a version he now feels called to become. This is one of the clearest signs a man has met someone who truly matters to his soul. His desire for self-improvement no longer stems from fear or insecurity, but from inspiration. He doesn't start waking up earlier to impress her. He wakes up earlier because his life suddenly feels like it matters more. His health, his focus, his clarity all become valuable because there is now something sacred he wants to show up for with wholeness. In psychological terms, this shift often corresponds with what's known as identity congruency, when a man's external actions begin to align with his internal values. There is a powerful release of mental energy. He no longer needs to wear multiple masks, one for work, one for friends, one for love. He becomes more whole, more centered. This internal coherence is often triggered by the presence of someone who sees him not only for who he is, but for who he is capable of becoming, and still chooses to walk with him as he evolves. There was a man, once a successful entrepreneur in his mid-40s, who confessed that despite having wealth, recognition, and freedom, he felt adrift. "I had everything," he said, "but I was still scattered. My mind, my habits, my relationships, I was divided into fragments." Then he met a woman, not someone who demanded change, but someone who lived with such grounded integrity that it silently challenged him. She never asked me to be more disciplined, but when I saw how she cared for her life, her time, her spirit, I couldn't bring my chaos into her world without feeling ashamed. I knew I had to rise, not to keep her, but to be someone I was proud to bring to her. This kind of transformation cannot be manipulated or manufactured. It happens only when the right kind of love collides with the right kind of timing. It's not about control, it's about inner readiness. And for many men, it is the first time they begin to experience discipline as devotion, not as obligation. In Eastern philosophy, there is a saying, when the student is ready, the teaching appears. For a man in love, the woman often becomes the mirror through which he receives that teaching, not through lectures or ultimatums, but through energetic reflection. Her clarity reminds him of his confusion. Her presence reveals his absence. Her self-respect exposes his compromises. And yet, she does not shame him. She invites him, not with words, but with example, to meet her in the space where authenticity lives. From a neuroscience perspective, when a man begins to stabilize emotionally and focus inwardly, his brain shifts from the survival-driven reactivity of the amygdala to the executive functioning of the prefrontal cortex. This is when he begins to make decisions that reflect long-term vision rather than short-term pleasure. His dopamine no longer spikes from novelty. It starts to rise from progress, from the feeling of becoming better for someone who deeply matters to him. And this is why, for the right woman, a man will clean up his life, not for approval, but because as his love becomes intentional, he realizes that love without structure is just emotion. It cannot build a life. So he starts removing the things that make him fragmented. He becomes careful with his time. He examines the people around him. He becomes less reactive, more composed. He doesn't stop living. He simply starts living with purpose. This is when love becomes an inner compass. It begins to point him toward accountability, not only to her, but to himself. He begins to question the things that used to distract him. He notices how certain habits dull his clarity, how certain environments disrupt his peace. And he starts making adjustments, not because someone is watching, but because he is watching himself now. The woman's presence gave him permission to care about himself in a way that doesn't feel selfish, but sacred. One man shared a story about this shift after falling deeply in love. I used to drink just to escape, he said. It was casual, social, but I knew it was slowing me down. After being with her for 6 months, I realized that every time I was hungover or foggy, I couldn't be fully present with her. And that became unacceptable, not to her, but to me. I stopped drinking, not because she asked, but because I couldn't bear to show up half alive for something so real. This is how real love matures a man. It doesn't change his personality. It elevates his presence. It makes him feel that his time is precious, his energy is meaningful, and his evolution is essential. He doesn't feel trapped, he feels called. And the calling is not to perfection, but to authentic excellency, to becoming a man who is not just capable of love, but capable of sustaining it. He begins to see love not as an escape from responsibility, but as the reason for responsibility. This mindset shift is subtle but profound. In his past relationships, he may have viewed compromise as loss, discipline as restriction, and emotional openness as risk. But now, he sees structure as strength. He understands that setting boundaries protects what matters, that choosing delayed gratification is not weakness, but wisdom. And that emotional maturity is not the absence of pain, but the ability to sit with it without being consumed. When a man loves deeply and rightly, he no longer wants to be impressive. He wants to be reliably. His energy becomes stable, his focus sharpens, and he begins to master the one thing that makes a man powerful in any area of life: consistency. This is when a man stops looking for shortcuts and starts honoring process. He doesn't just plan for the future, he prepares for it. He doesn't just talk about change, he implements it brick by brick. He doesn't run from discomfort. He sits with it, learns from it, and lets it shape him, because the love he's building is no longer fragile. It's rooted in effort, in repetition, in the sacred rhythm of daily devotion. There's a quiet story told in some Zen traditions of a man who, after meeting a woman of deep presence, began waking every morning at sunrise to sweep the temple grounds. When asked why, he replied, "Because someone now lives in my heart and I must keep it clean." This may seem poetic, but it reflects a deep truth. A man in love will start tending to the unseen parts of his life. He will clean up his language, not to be polite, but to speak with care. He will monitor his thoughts, not out of guilt, but to protect his focus. He will pay attention to how he speaks about others, how he spends his money, how he uses his phone. Not because someone is managing him, but because as he has chosen to be mindful of what he allows into his system. This is what love does when it is real. It creates inner order. It is not urgent. It is not performative. It is not broadcasted online. It is quiet, personal, sacred. The man who once moved through life with ease or avoidance begins to slow down, to observe, to refine. He trades convenience for depth. He learns that love is not just about having feelings. It's about earning trust with every choice. And perhaps most profoundly, he stops trying to be a man who is loved by many and starts trying to be a man who is thus deeply known by one. That knowing requires honesty. It requires change. It requires the kind of humility that says, I may not be perfect yet, but I'm willing to become better. Not for you, but because of you. And that kind of willingness, that is the seed from which a man's character begins to blossom. This is where transformation truly lives, not in promises, but in patterns, not in intensity, but in integrity, and not in pressure, but in presence. When a man loves like this, every day becomes an offering, every habit becomes a prayer, and every choice becomes a reflection of the love he is building, not only with someone else, but within himself. In the quiet moments of real connection, a man may discover something that completely changes the way he approaches love, purpose, and even his own identity. It happens not in the loud peaks of romance, but in the deep valleys of reflection, when he realizes that partnership is not simply a destination, but a path to personal transcendence. When a man truly loves the right woman, the relationship becomes less about possession and more about evolution. She becomes not a goal he has achieved, but a space where he begins to shed everything that is not real. This inner movement rarely begins with intention. Most of the time, it's unconscious. At first, he believes he is simply drawn to her. Her presence is grounding. Her eyes reflect a sense of belonging. Her mind challenges him, not through conflict, but through clarity. And as he remains close to her, something starts to shift. His ego, the part of him that seeks control, praise, certainty, begins to loosen. Not because she demands it, but because she doesn't cater to it. She relates to his Sade essence, not his performance. That alone begins the unraveling. In ancient Taoist teachings, there is a belief that the most sacred relationships are not between two perfect individuals, but between two as honest souls. A man doesn't find transcendence by escaping into love, but by using love as a mirror to confront everything within him that blocks his natural state of presence. He doesn't dissolve into her identity, he deepens into his own. And this deepening is not always gentle. It requires him to feel, to confront, to strip away the layers of who he thought he needed to be, and instead emerge as who he already was, beneath the roles. This is not the common understanding of love. Most relationships today are fueled by emotional exchange, convenience, compatibility, or shared goals. These are not wrong. But a transcendent partnership goes further. It becomes a container for awakening, a place where both people are confronted by their limitations and lovingly invited to outgrow them. In this kind of love, the man no longer asks, "How can she meet my needs?" He begins to ask, "How can I meet life more fully because of what I've found in her?" There is a story of a man who spent years building a career, perfecting his image, and mastering the art of control. He was successful in every external way, but when he entered a relationship with a woman who radiated sincerity and self-awareness, his world began to disorient, not because she disrupted it, but because she invited truth into it. He found himself forgetting to perform. He was quieter, more introspective. At first, he felt weak, vulnerable, like something was being taken from him. But slowly, he began to see that what was fading wasn't strength, it was armor. And underneath the armor was someone he hadn't met in a long time, himself. In this awakening, he no longer saw love as a transaction. He saw it as a practice, a discipline, a sacred space where both joy and discomfort could exist, not as signs of failure, but as opportunities for depth. He didn't just want to be loved. He wanted to become someone capable of loving with depth, consistency, and spiritual clarity. This shift marks the beginning of a different kind of relationship, one in which a man doesn't run from emotional intensity, but learns to breathe within it. The woman's emotional world, rather than being something he avoids or controls, becomes something he learns from. Her intuition reveals blind spots. Her calmness reveals his chaos. Her self-respect invites his maturity. And in moments where he would previously shut down, he now leans in, not to solve her, but to understand himself through the way he responds. Psychologically, this is the embodiment of evolution. In neuroscience, relationships like these activate neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself based on experience. When a man is in a relationship that consistently invites him into higher states of emotional awareness, the patterns of reactivity and defensiveness can begin to dissolve. He doesn't just behave differently, he becomes different. Not as an act of will, but as a byproduct of the spiritual invitation he has accepted. This is why a man with a growth mindset often feels challenged and yet deeply nourished by a woman who does not feed his ego, but holds space for his becoming. Her love isn't blind, it's visionary. She doesn't love the potential version of him. She loves the present version fully, and that love becomes the very fire that awakens the potential in him. In Buddhist psychology, there's a term F, kalika mitat, spiritual friendship. The highest form of relationship is seen not as romantic or familial, but as one where each person becomes a spiritual friend to the other, not clinging, not fixing, but standing beside the other as a mirror and a witness on the path to wholeness. When a man sees his partner in this light, she is no longer his. She is a mystery to be honored, a soul to walk beside with reverence. And he, in return, becomes less interested in proving his strength and more committed to living it. He becomes more attuned to silence, more patient in conflict, more curious in difficulty. He doesn't run from emotional responsibility. He trains in it the same way he would train in a physical discipline, not for approval, not even for outcome, but because the presence of love has revealed that as who he becomes through this practice is more valuable than anything he could achieve outside of it. One evening, an elderly man was asked what made his 50-year marriage successful. He replied, "Every year, I met a different version of my wife, and I had to choose her again and again. But every time I did, I met a new version of myself, too." His words held a simple truth. Love that transcends does not stay still. It transforms, it evolves. It requires re-choosing, re-learning, re-humbling. And only the ego resists this process. The soul, however, knows this is its path home. So the man who meets the right woman does not ask, How do I keep her interested? He begins to ask, how do I keep evolving in her presence? He seeks less to possess and more to participate in the shared creation of a relationship that reveals not just more of the other, but more of the self. In that space, love becomes a kind of dojo, a place of sacred practice where both are sharpened, softened, and stripped of illusion. This practice is not always comfortable. In fact, it is often difficult, because love, when real, will touch every unhealed place within. It will bring up childhood patterns. It will stir insecurities. It will surface fears that were long buried. And the man who has been trained to run from pain will feel tempted to withdraw. But if he stays, if he breathes through the discomfort instead of reacting to it, he will discover something extraordinary, that his ability to hold love and his ability to hold himself are the same skill. This realization is the key to emotional maturity. When a man learns not to flee from his partner's emotion, but to stand with her in it, he is also learning to stand with his own. Her sadness no longer feels like pressure. Her joy no longer feels like distance. Her anger no longer feels like a personal attack. He becomes less entangled in reaction and more grounded in awareness. And in this awareness, he begins to listen in a new way, not to her words alone, but to her energy. He starts to notice the subtle ways she is growing, shifting, transforming. He doesn't interrupt this process. He supports it, not by guiding her, but by matching her in depth. She becomes not the only spiritual force in the relationship. He joins her there, and together they create a relational field that is not just loving, but awakening. A young man once wrote in his journal, "Before her, I was a man of ambition. After her, I am a man of vision." His dreams did not disappear, but they became clearer, quieter, and more aligned with who he truly was. Her presence refined him, not through rules, but through resonance. And in return, he began showing up not as a man performing love, but as a man embodying it. What happens to a man when he walks this path is nothing short of spiritual alchemy. His rawness becomes wisdom. His defensiveness becomes discernment. His urgency becomes patience. And the relationship becomes less about getting needs met and more about being present for the unfolding of each other's inner worlds. Love like this is not for the faint of heart. It is not for those addicted to convenience. It is for those who are willing to be shaped, even undone, in the process of becoming someone who can truly hold space for another human being. It is not glamorous. It is not always pleasant, but it is real. And in that realness, there is something eternal, a frequency of connection that outlives beauty, youth, status, and even time itself. In this kind of love, a man does not fear surrender, because he no longer sees it as weakness. He sees it as the strongest act of devotion. He doesn't lose himself in her. He finds himself more deeply by being with her. And from that place of awareness, he begins to walk the world differently, not as someone who is trying to win in life, but as someone who is already rooted in something priceless, a connection that is not just intimate, but transformative. When a man truly reveals his heart, when he allows himself to show sides of his being that the world rarely witnesses, he is not just loving, he is trusting. He is not just interested, he is invested. The signs may be subtle, and often they are not loudly spoken. But to the woman attuned to her own self-worth, her own quiet strength, and her own emotional clarity, they are unmistakable. He opens his soul, not because he is weak, but because he finally feels safe. He lets go of control, not because he is lost, but because he knows he has found someone who will walk beside him, not ahead or behind. He changes his rhythm, his routines, and even his priorities, not out of obligation, but out of a deep desire to build something sacred. Such a connection is never built on charm or physical attraction alone. It is born of emotional consistency, spiritual alignment, and the subtle energy that is felt more than seen. The kind of woman who sees these things is rare, not because others are incapable, but because few cultivate the stillness to notice what is beneath the surface. Few are present enough to witness the soft unfolding of a man's deeper truth, and even fewer are grounded enough in themselves to hold the truth with both grace and discernment. This isn't about being the most beautiful, the most intelligent, or the most accomplished. It is about resonance. It is about self-awareness. It is about being the kind of person who inspires emotional safety and evokes the desire for authentic connection. A man only becomes his highest version in the presence of someone who does not demand it, but simply reflects it. Someone who calls him into himself, not through pressure, but through presence. In the end, love is not about being chosen, but about being recognized. When a man recognizes in a woman the sanctuary he never knew he was looking for, the loyalty he offers is unshakable, the effort he gives is continuous, and the love he expresses becomes a daily act of devotion to the woman who sees these 9 things, not with her eyes, but with her soul. Know that your power lies not in trying to make someone